Before this story begins, I want you to do something real quick. If you enjoy slow burn stories, emotional tension, and moments that feel too real to ignore, subscribe to the channel. These stories take time, heart, and honesty, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Now, let me take you back to the moment everything quietly changed. When I first heard Daniel's name, it meant nothing to me. He wasn't a mystery. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't even a face. He was just another name that floated casually into our conversations. Usually late at night, usually when Mark was tired and loosening his tie after work. Daniel closed the deal today. Daniel handled the client meltdown. Honestly, I don't know how Daniel stays so calm under pressure. That was it. No stories. No emotion. No reason for me to remember him. Mark worked at one of those firms downtown. The kind that looked impressive from the outside and exhausting from the inside. Glass walls, open concept offices, quiet competition disguised as teamwork. Everyone dressed sharply, spoke carefully, and measured their value in promotions, bonuses, and how late their laptops stayed open at night. Daniel, as far as I knew, was just another man in a suit. One of many. The kind who shook hands too firmly at company events. The kind who laughed half a second too late at executive jokes. The kind who sent emails at midnight just to prove he was still awake. In other words, invisible to me. And honestly, I liked it that way. Because my life was already full. Predictable. Structured. Safe. I was Mark's wife. The supportive partner. The woman who hosted dinners and smiled politely and listened without interrupting. I had learned how to play that role well. Too well. It was Mark's idea to host the dinner. A small thing, he said, already scrolling through his phone. Just a few people from the office. Casual. I knew what that meant. Casual meant wine that was too expensive to open on a normal night. Casual meant conversations about quarterly projections dressed up as humor. Casual meant me spending the entire evening performing a version of myself I hadn't consciously chosen. I wasn't thrilled. Entertaining Mark's coworkers always felt like stepping onto a stage mid-scene. I knew my lines. I knew when to laugh, when to nod, when to refill glasses. But none of it felt like me. Still I agreed. Because that's what I did. The day of the dinner, I moved through the house on autopilot. The table came out first, the good one. Then the china we only used for special occasions. Candles evenly spaced. Wine glasses polished until they caught the light just right. Everything looked perfect. And somehow, that made me feel strangely empty. I chose a black dress from the back of my closet. Simple. Elegant. Safe. It hugged me just enough to look intentional, but not enough to invite attention. Or at least, that's what I told myself. As I zipped it up, I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused. I looked fine. Not unhappy. Not excited. Just fine. I remember thinking, without fully realizing why, that I felt like I was preparing for something important without knowing what it was. Daniel was the first to arrive. I remember that clearly. The doorbell rang earlier than expected, and for a split second, I considered pretending not to hear it. But habit won. I opened the door and stopped. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just enough to feel it. He stood there with an ease that didn't need announcing. Taller than Mark. Broader shoulders. Not flashy, not stiff, just grounded. And his eyes. Green. Sharp but warm. The kind of eyes that didn't rush. They didn't skim past me the way most people's did. They stayed. As if he were taking in more than just what was visible. "Hi," he said, smiling slightly. "You must be Emily." His voice was steady. Calm. Comfortable in its own space. "Yes," I replied. "And you're Daniel." When we shook hands, it wasn't the firmness that stood out. It was the pause. That extra half second where neither of us pulled away. Where something unnamed passed between us. And just like that, something inside me shifted. Quietly, subtly, but unmistakably. The rest of the guests arrived soon after. The house filled with familiar sounds. Coats being taken, polite laughter, the soft clink of glass against glass. Mark slipped easily into his role, moving through the room like he belonged everywhere at once. He told stories, exaggerated just enough to be charming, and soaked in the attention the way he always did. I watched him for a moment and felt something unexpected. Distance. Not resentment. Not anger. Just distance. I drifted toward the kitchen, instinctively taking my place on the edges of the evening, refilling drinks, checking plates, smiling when spoken to, listening more than talking. And yet, no matter where I stood, I felt Daniel's presence. Not in an obvious way. Not like someone staring. It was subtler than that. Every time I turned, he seemed to already be aware of me. Not watching, but noticing. As if my movements registered somewhere quietly in his mind. Once, while passing hors d'oeuvres, our fingers brushed. It was brief. Accidental. But the sensation lingered longer than it should have. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was tired. That hosting always made me sensitive. That I was reading meaning into empty space. Still, my heart didn't seem interested in logic. Dinner was served, and everyone gathered around the table. Conversation bounced easily. Work stories, mutual acquaintances, complaints disguised as jokes. Mark held court at one end of the table, confident and animated. Daniel sat across from me. Not directly. Just offset enough that I could see him when I looked up. Every so often, our eyes met. And each time, it felt deliberate. Not hungry. Not inappropriate. Just aware. Like two people standing on opposite sides of a thin line, pretending not to see it. When someone made a joke that landed particularly well, Daniel laughed. But his eyes flicked to me first, as if checking whether I found it amusing too. When I spoke, even casually, he listened. Not politely. Intently. As though my words mattered more than they probably should have. It unsettled me. And worse, it awakened something I thought had gone quiet years ago. By the time dessert arrived, the energy in the room had shifted. Wine had softened voices. Laughter lingered longer. But beneath it all, something else pulsed, subtle and electric. When I reached across the table to pass a serving spoon, Daniel's hand brushed mine again. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. It lasted a heartbeat longer than necessary. And in that moment, I felt it. Not desire. Not temptation. Recognition. The kind that doesn't ask permission. I looked up at him, and he smiled. Not wide. Not playful. Knowing. I felt my breath hitch. And then Mark said my name, snapping me gently back into the room. I laughed it off. Shifted in my chair. Took a sip of wine I didn't need. I told myself, this ends tonight. Guests began to leave not long after. Coats were collected. Compliments were exchanged. Promises to do this again sometime floated through the hallway. Mark got pulled into a conversation near the door, deep into office politics. That's when Daniel lingered. Just long enough. The house quieted in that strange way it does at the end of a gathering, when the energy hasn't left yet, but the people have. It was a beautiful dinner, Daniel said softly. You really have a way of making people feel comfortable. I smiled, my voice coming out quieter than intended. Thank you. And then it happened. He looked at me. Not casually. Not politely. But fully. There was no flirtation in his expression. No assumption. Just honesty. An unspoken acknowledgement of everything we had both felt. And everything we were choosing not to do. For a moment, the world narrowed. The noise faded. Time slowed. I saw it clearly then, not the beginning of something, but the edge of it. And edges are dangerous. I held his gaze, letting myself feel it fully, and then letting it go. Because some moments aren't meant to be acted on. They're meant to be recognized. He nodded once, small, respectful. Good night, Emily. Good night, Daniel. And he left. I stood there longer than necessary after the door shut. The house felt different. Quieter. Heavier. Mark joined me moments later, already talking about work again, unaware that anything unusual had occurred. I nodded. Responded. Smiled when appropriate. Later, while washing dishes, I replayed the evening in fragments. The glances. The pauses. The silence that said more than words ever could. That night, lying in bed beside my husband, I stared at the ceiling. I didn't fantasize. I didn't imagine what could have been. Instead, I thought about what it meant to feel seen, even briefly. About how rare that feeling had become. and how dangerous it was to realize you'd been missing it. Nothing ever happened. Daniel remained a name again. A colleague. A distant presence in stories Mark told at dinner. We never spoke of that night. But sometimes, years later, I still think about it. Not with regret. With understanding. Because that moment reminded me of something important. That attraction doesn't always announce itself loudly. That temptation isn't always about crossing lines. And that sometimes, the most powerful connections are the ones we choose not to pursue. They show us who we are, what we crave, and what we're willing to protect. And then they let us go. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt something that couldn't be acted on but couldn't be ignored, subscribe to the channel. More stories like this are coming. Because some moments don't change our lives. They simply remind us we're alive.